Hi,
Okay.
I'm Jon Atack, and I'm delighted to welcome my very dear friend, Dr. Steven Hassan. Hi, Steve.
Thank you so much. And John, you're smarter than I am and more educated than I am. You deserve multiple doctorates, in my humble opinion. And I want to thank you for being my friend and my confidant and my educator, and helping me, write. You help me edit the updated combating, and we did a chapter on lone actor terrorism for Oxford Press, and what else? We've written a few academic
things.
There's
the psychiatry and anti-Semitism piece for the Springer.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so you deserve multiple PhDs. If anyone's listening to this, I mean it.
Who's got a spare PhD, then send it to me. Yeah, it's been an interesting career. In 1991, Aarhus University approached me and said, would you like a doctorate? And I said, oh, all right. And they were willing to take the full manuscript of what is now Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky as a doctorate. And everything went swimmingly. And then the last moment, the university decided that for the first time ever, you couldn't do your viva in English. So I needed to learn either German or Danish.
That's not fair.
It's not fair, and this is the kind of thing that's happened to me throughout my life. As you know, I am probably the only person living who has 10 precedents in law.
And your let's sell them a piece of blue sky went to the Supreme Court because Scientology tried to suppress it.
It got as far as the appeals court. And Scientology successfully suppressed it. And that's one of my precedents, that only in the history of the United States, only 2 books have been prevented from publication. The other one was Victor Marchetti's book about the CIA. And you can see that there might have been some reason for that. But mine was the second and only other book to be stopped from publication. And we went to appeal through your friend Mel Wolfe. In fact, Mel was he was Marchetti's lawyer, and then he was my lawyer, and what a brilliant man. And I think that he went to the publisher. I think the publisher decided to just drop the book. And he went along, and I think he made a very strong case that, we ought to do this, because otherwise there would never be another hostile biography published in the United States. It would be that simple.
So to do this means publish it.
Yes, the book must go ahead.
Yes,
and,
great book, the definitive book on Scientology that Russell Miller took from, and Lawrence Wright took from, and what's the other woman's name?
Janet Reitman.
Reitman took from, and really, they all owe you money, in my opinion, as well as credit, because you did the research.
You're very kind. Yeah, I mean,
what are friends for?
Yeah, men of genius should form societies of mutual appreciation. Oliver Wendell Holmes. There you go.
Great. So I just want to also say that you have a channel on YouTube, and I'm proud to be part of it. And you've been on my channel and my podcast as well. And I think about just how much you've motivated me, and I hope I've stimulated you in some level to just do more to help a greater audience, because the world truly needs our expertise.
Yes, I think to have traveled this journey and to have traveled it for so long, it's more than 40 years for you, and it'll be 40 years for me in October since I left Scientology. And there was so little that was available in trying to understand this modern phenomenon of authoritarian cults. And really the breakthrough work was your book in 1988, Combating Mind Control. That there hadn't been a popular book that was easy to read and to grasp and explain this problem. Just today I was talking with Hoyt Richards, and he said, it was reading Steve's book that allowed me to walk out of the prison. And Spike, my assistant, she read your book, and that made all the difference. So, and we've come away since then as well. In the 30 years since, we've learned something about how this is working, and it's shameful that the ideas that we've come to haven't really got into the mainstream yet. I think they will. But
it is getting there. More and more former members are speaking out, doing podcasts and documentaries and writing books and becoming mental health professionals and social psychologists. And Alexandra Steen, for example, is another person who read Combating. She left the political cult and she's written brilliant books. Dan Shaw, another brilliant former cult member, became a therapist in his case, 2 great books on traumatic narcissism. So, if I can use a biological metaphor, I believe we are the white blood cells of the immune system of the human species, because we know how to identify this, virus, this mind virus.
And it's seeing that the way that it affects everything in our society, that authoritarianism is the fundamental disease of humanity. The bowing down to people who believe they're gods, and not being willing to take authority ourselves for what we do. There was a psychiatrist called Nikki Crowley, took a master's degree in the psychology of coercive control at Salford with Rod and Linda Dubrow-Marshall. And she came to me and interviewed me for the piece she was working on. Her dissertation was, quite simply, would it be helpful to people who are seeking to de-radicalize terrorists to talk to people who've exit counseled or intervened for members of authoritarian cults? And her conclusion was, it would be.
Surprise, surprise.
But although I've been in touch, I've spoken at 2 Radicalization Awareness Network events. That's a Europe-wide group.
Yep.
Prevent who are the UK counter-terror group. They were very interested. I was offered a job there. A 10-minute conversation. It's like, would you like to come and work for us? And it's like, yeah, I'd love to, if I can train people to do it. But if you want me to go out and talk to the 15-year-old who's just been radicalized, no. I have no interest in that. We have to reach a larger audience. And with the Cult of Trump, which I think is an amazing book, by the way. I think it's a wonderful book. And that pushes us to the heart of the problem, that authoritarianism is alive and hacking in the world. And so that, looking at Putin and what, the desperate things that he's doing, this power that we need to do something about. We need to change the ethos, the feeling of society, so that people aren't willing to be, to fall in under an insane leader, and we'll develop courageous followership, as Ira Shalev put it.
Right, exactly. And just today in the news about the Bolsonaro supporters attack, the media still gets it wrong. They don't understand these people have been radicalized. They're not just coming up out of their own minds, we love Bolsonaro, but the media frames it as a popular uprising, and they don't understand. People are on the internet. People are being indoctrinated, recruited and indoctrinated, and AI is involved, and information warfare is involved. And, I talk about the New Apostolic Reformation and the cult of Trump, but people don't understand that there are 650 million, this is estimate, members around the world of these pseudo-Christian cults where the leaders say they get direct revelations from God and can cast out demons and speak in tongues, etc. And the followers are totally under the bite model of authoritarian control, the behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. And they are so afraid of being invaded by Satan that they'll do whatever their apostle or their prophet tells them they have to do.
Yeah. And it's as if we're still living in the Middle Ages, where you say after the Black Death you have the flagellant cult, where and I'm proud to say, I'm not necessarily tremendously proud to be British at all times, but in this one instance, I am proud to be English. Let's be exact, because the flagellants were turned back when they tried to enter England. But what they were doing was they were walking around Europe with leather straps with nails in them, flogging themselves, in the hope that God would stop the pestilence. And
reminds me of Opus Dei a little bit.
It's Opus Dei is a continuation of it. This bizarre cult within the Catholic Church, who hurt themselves to get pleasure. We put a word for that. It's not religion either. It's after Baron von Massoch, I think his name was, the masochist. These people will do such things. I mean, there are still in the 1990s there was a ban on Shiite Muslims celebrating by walking through the streets with swords and cutting themselves. In London, it was decided this was not proper in our secular society. So people will go to those extremes, but understanding when you take the violence out of it, when you take the bloodletting out of it, understanding just how fanatical people can be. We've both been, and you far more deeply than I, we've both been looking at QAnon. And you look at that first post, it's like at such and such a time in the morning, AM, to make sure you knew what morning meant, Hillary Clinton will be arrested. And it didn't happen. And you go, so why did you believe this guy? So right from the start, but there is such an urge to believe, such a demand to conform with the people around us, and the groupthink, the obedience that's trained into us. And we have a society that's authoritarian in greater or lesser degree.
Yeah, and I just want to comment that I analyzed it, QAnon, as a cult, not just a conspiracy theory, and a psy-op, psychological warfare operation. Did a TEDx Mid-Atlantic called Dismantling QAnon. And very recently, John, Michael Flynn himself, who used to do psy-ops on other countries, called it a psy-op and said anyone who believes in QAnon is a moron. He actually said that on a podcast, which was very interesting because he swore the digital soldier oath, and all of my open source researchers who track back to 2017 say he was involved with the very early parts of this psy-op himself. So,
sorry, did you say digital service oath?
I'm sorry, digital soldier oath.
Digital soldier oath. Oh no, I misheard you.
Digital. He swore an oath on camera that he was recruiting an army of digital soldiers. I think it was summer of 2020, maybe, before the election.
And he now feels that those digital soldiers are all morons.
Well, he didn't say digital soldiers are morons. He said QAnon believers were morons. But, the people that I've talked to who are deep into the QAnon rabbit hole thought that Michael Flynn was the be-all and end-all, if not Q himself. So I'm wondering what's going on in their thinking process right now, if they are aware that he is saying this publicly. Of course, let's not forget he took the Fifth Amendment 500 times or something when he was being asked questions about his role in the coup and QAnon and everything.
A little bit suspicious, eh?
Yeah. Some people say he should be drafted back into the service and court-martialed. Because anyway, All I can say is I'm so happy that there are people like you on the planet and so many good people who are standing up and saying, look, this is real. This is psychology. This is social psychology. This is neuroscience. Our friend Yuval Laor has a very important theory on emotions. Why don't you take a minute and let's plug Yuval's work.
Yeah, absolutely. We first met him at Toronto at the Getting Clear of Scientology conference in
that
June.
You put together, and I was on stage with you and demoing hypnosis and the training routines. I think with Christian Zirko and Chris Shelton, maybe.
That's
Am I
it.
remembering correctly?
That's absolutely right.
Okay, and back to you.
That is available on the channel here. And Spike will doubtless put a link into it.
Great.
But Yuval came up, and you can't really miss him. He's 6'6", and shook my hand and said, "I've been using your work for 20 years." It was like, really? And it made me think about the moment when Jimi Hendrix walked up to Buddy Guy and said, "I've learned so much from you." And Buddy Guy looked at me and said, "I didn't get no checks."
That's a good one.
But our Buddy Guy is brilliant. Everybody should listen to the last 15 Buddy Guy albums. Absolutely wonderful. But yeah, there he was, this larger than life character, basically saying that he'd been researching belief and awe and fervor, and that he'd done his doctoral research on this. And what a background. He has a degree, he had a double major in physics and philosophy at Colorado, and then he did a master's in the history of science and ideas, and then this incredible PhD, which is called The Religious Ape. And he fundamentally has looked at the steps of induction into a group, or indeed a relationship, where the stages of manipulation, which will lead almost anybody. If you're in the wrong place, it will lead anybody, with the exception of psychopaths. I don't think you can recruit them properly, but they only make up 2% of the population. Just about everybody else is going to respond.
Right.
And you'll have, there's the idea of something miraculous having occurred. An inexplicable event is the way I put it back to him when he used the word miraculous. And that makes you willing to believe much more than you should believe. So you'll have an experience of euphoria, getting high. The most typical one is the Ganzfeld effect, where you get somebody to stare at something. It's called meditation in some corners, but I call it staring at something. And your perception will start to, things will start, colors will start emerging.
Is that what it is? I have not known that name, but I remember as a little kid staring, and it was starting to do those things.
Yeah, and if you sit somebody in a completely darkened room, silent darkened room, the normal person within a few minutes will have the sense that there are things moving. They'll also start to hear noises. And what's happened is, this is a metaphor, but what's happened is feedback is being created because the volume of perception is being turned up. Nothing's happening. And the brain starts to make something happen. So if you stare at something fixedly, you'll start to see colors, distortions of perception, but you'll also, of course, move into an altered state.
Yeah.
And feel euphoria.
And makes you more suggestible if somebody has a hidden agenda that wants to program you.
Exactly. And so if you can give somebody an experience of awe, whether that be a terrifying experience or a likable, a peak experience, and you've done something that makes it seem that you have this special knowledge, then all of us become way too open, as you say, to the suggestion that comes from that source. And that can then be developed into fervor. we've had, I think we cut up his presentation into 3 parts, and it's on the channel here. And he tells me that the first draft of his book is very nearly ready. So
I'm ready to read the draft. But he does these beautiful mind mapping kinds of illustrations for anyone who hasn't seen any of his presentations. He also came on my Freedom of Mind site as well and did a presentation, but yours was, I think, much more extensive.
Well, we wanted to do the full presentation. I'd sort of taken him to conferences with me because I think what he's doing is so important.
Yep.
And so if I was booked for something, I'd get him booked as well.
It is important because people think we're rational, but we're emotional. Beings that rationalize.
Yeah, absolutely. Jill Bolt Taylor, who at one time was a professor of neuroscience at Harvard, said, was the effect of, we believe that we are thinking creatures that feel, we are actually feeling creatures that think. I also dare anybody to separate thought and emotion as distinct things, that we have feelings within our thoughts. We aren't, unless of course you're Mr. Spock, in which case you don't. But human beings who are not Vulcans have feelings, and it doesn't matter how we spin it, we have a feeling about whatever we're doing. And we then get into this area of the feelings of knowing, the feelings of certainty, which William James talked about in the Varieties of Religious Experience. He called it noesis. Now, it's interesting when Yuval and I started talking, realizing that we both have this thing about William James. He was a remarkable man, and quite deeply religious as well, which most people don't know. And a founder of both the American and the British Societies for Psychical Research. So there you go. There's a wonderful book called Ghost Hunters by Deborah Blum, about incredible book, great book. But nonetheless, William James gives us this idea of the feelings of knowing. And I always give the same example. When I was 17, born again, spent 2 hours trying to convince me that Jesus was my personal savior. And as he backed away from me, obviously keeping himself safe so I didn't jump on his back and tear him to pieces, he said, and I hadn't been nasty with him or anything. I was just saying, well, where does he say he's the Son of God? And he backed away and he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. Those are feelings of knowing.
Yep.
We're trying to push people towards evidence.
Definitely. I just read a very interesting book that I want to share called The Knowledge Illusion. I'm not remembering the authors, but
Spike will find them.
I was working on 2 chapters on the dark side of hypnosis with our mutual friend, Alan Shefflin, law professor emeritus, who unfortunately has been subjected to a stroke. And we're hoping for his full recovery.
Absolutely.
But in any case, the editor, as she was reading the chapters, mentioned that book. And so I looked it up and I read it, and it really talks about how human beings walk around thinking they know things, but they did research asking people to explain what it is that they know, like how does a zipper work? Or how does a flush toilet, what is the mechanism that works in a flush toilet? And almost no one knows, but they walk around thinking that they know. And there's extensive research that we depend on others to fill in the gaps. And if we need to know something explicitly, we look to experts. But why it's so important and why I mention it right now, John, is just that there's been an attack, 4th generation warfare on experts, to distrust everybody, to distrust science, to distrust experts, to distrust institutions, which obviously makes the public much more vulnerable and confused and vulnerable to certainty of people saying, no, I know what's going on. It's, it's the Illuminati, or it's the adrenochrome sucking people.
It is the adrenochrome, yeah.
Whatever. But it's a fascinating book. And we feel better thinking we know stuff instead of going, I don't know. I'd like to think I know, but I'm open to learning more. That's my fallback always, is change my mind, teach me, show me evidence that's convincing. I'm happy to change my belief on something.
Yeah, and it's an important perspective. And I enjoy cognitive dissonance when somebody says something to me that they're challenging what I think. I either have the opportunity to defend that thought and explain it, or all too often I have the opportunity to be told I'm wrong.
I'd like to see that day that
well,
that somebody proves you wrong, honestly. But
okay.
you're human, so it's possible, I guess.
My
fantasy, if I may share for your listeners, is you, me, and Tom Cruise in a room for a day or two or three.
Do we get one Golden Globe each?
I would love to watch. I would love to watch you and him interact and just make a comment here or there. But that would be really fascinating.
It's interesting because over the years there have been so many celebrities involved with Scientology, and not one of them has ever come to me.
Not even Leah Remini?
I approached her, and she did respond, which is good, and I got a full page handwritten letter back from her. But that thought, the problem that when you leave a group, you still think you know everything, exactly that knowledge illusion. And of course, pretty much nothing at the point where you leave. And, we years ago, we were in LA in 91, I think it was, and we talked with Kirstie Alley's former PA. And, the exciting thought that maybe you could get to one of these celebrities who have such influence. They shouldn't have such influence. In fact, you're a good actor, but they have incredible, the copycat statistics on when a celebrity commits suicide, the suicide rate goes up. So that's quite a lot of influence to have there. But that thought that, if Nicole Kidman had come to us and we could have sat down and sorted it out for her, so she was okay, and then spoken out, and instead silence. Just, sadly, so many former members.
So I'm going to make an appeal. If you've been thinking about being public and you have celebrity, reach out to Jon or me, because we would love to talk with you. And I want to circle back for a minute, back to Yuval's thesis about awe. In our cultures, we're taught to have awe to celebrities.
Yeah.
When people say, Donald Trump, like, why would people be impressed by him or whatever? But if you watch The Apprentice or what, you think he's wealthy, you might project, have this feeling of awe and project onto him that he's somehow a great person.
And, he has everything covered in gold. So,
gold plate, at least, right?
Yeah, well, it's not gold plate, actually. It's gold colored. It's probably brass, but
it's fascinating.
There was an interview with the woman who was the project manager for Trump Towers, and I agree when she said it's a handsome building. I agree, it looks handsome. However, she said the inside, everything is the cheapest possible material. At a time when people are buying apartments there for $10 million, she's saying it's made of medium density fiberboard. It's chipboard.
It's showy, in other words.
And that is the whole of the man, that he has. He's made an image. He's made an impression that has impressed people. And if you are, desperate and unemployed in the Rust Belt, and this guy comes along and says, "We're going to drain the swamp," the thought that, hang on a minute, he's one of the people making the swamp. He's a billionaire. Right. These are not people we should necessarily trust.
Right.
But
and Mark Burnett made him really famous, for The Apprentice, and he was involved with the Seven Mountain Dominionists. He's a major figure, and the family introduced Trump at the National Prayer Breakfast. And they want to destroy the separation of church and state in the United States, and they want to impose, this theocracy.
Yeah, and isn't it a peculiar thought that the writers of the Constitution, a number of them were not Christians, and so possibly religious tolerance was because they were deists and had a different belief.
Mm.
And now we see, since I think it was Eisenhower who introduced the pledge and all of this "In God We Serve" stuff. It's very modern.
50s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. When he's president from what, 52 or something.
Yeah. People don't realize that's a recent addition to America's culture and government.
And a violation of the principles of the Constitution, that it is imposing a belief system. But here we go, that this idea of, it's the idea in radical Islam that church and state, and Islam has actually maintained that separation in most places, in many places.
Yeah.
But to see that by people who are very upset about Islam and don't realize that, the Salafi Muslims make up 0.5%, and the radical Shiites make up another 0.5%. Most people don't want to destroy the people around them and create horror. One of the things that's been bothering me,
1,000%.
Yeah, in this year, since 11 months since Putin invaded the Ukraine, is my friends telling me they don't like Russians and what Russia is doing, and I'm kind of going, it's the leadership that's doing it,
right?
1,000%. Yeah,
1,000%. And I interviewed a really courageous former member, Yasmin Mohammed, who wrote an excellent book called Unveiled about her experience growing up in an extremist, fundamentalist Muslim environment. And she was married off to a man she didn't love, who turned out to be an Al-Qaeda bomb maker. And so I did the podcast this week, and the blog will be forthcoming. But she said that one of the turning point moments was when they were pressuring her to take her daughter to Egypt to have genital mutilation. And she said, at that point, for my daughter's sake, I had to get out.
Yeah.
And this is, families do it to these young girls. It's horrible.
It's absolutely incredible. And it does bring us to this point of, how can people do that? That you give somebody a belief that sexual stimulation is evil for women.
Not for guys. Guys can have 4 wives. Come on.
Yeah.
You can rotate.
And that first part of it, which is kind of, and then the second part, which is that by removing the clitoris, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, it's like chopping the head of the penis off, basically.
Ouch.
Yeah, just thought I'd get that one in there for any boys watching. It's not circumcision, it's the removal of the organ. Right. And of course that organ is as large or larger than the penis and goes within, and so you aren't actually achieving the objective. You're doing something horrific, and you're traumatizing somebody for life.
Yep.
So, but the Chinese practice of foot binding, which went on for 1,000 years, the 7-year-old girl would have a foot broken and bandaged so it wouldn't grow properly, so she would never be able to run.
Good way to enslave a person.
Yeah, that you hobble them. And
terrible. I didn't know that. I knew that they bound feet, but I didn't understand that it was to
the bone is broken. Yeah.
To keep them from running away.
Well, they won't be able to run. It's that simple. And it came to be put forward as an idea of beauty, that it was somehow necessary. But the way that people will accept such a thing, and I would say in the same way, those people who accept the idea that skin color is relevant to who you are, what culture you grew up in, that's relevant. But I have a black friend whose parents are West Indian, but he grew up here. So as far as I'm concerned, he's English.
Yeah,
it doesn't go any further than that, because that's his culture. That's what he knows. And but in the same way, that people develop prejudice for any reason, this group being different to our group, and then they spread hatred and let it grow, and we get authoritarian groups. We get the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the Ku Klux Klan, or the Black Panthers. I'm colorblind when it comes to this, and we get an awful amount of prejudice that will escalate into violence ultimately.
So, people who make the effort to grow up developmentally learn to look at reality from different lenses and different cultural and historical viewpoints, and don't think that they're the center of the universe, assume everything should be the way they are, but they can realize, people have different journeys and we need cooperation. That's another theme that the public needs to hear more about, is the power of cooperation and friendship groups to cooperate and help each other, versus this Ayn Randian selfishness is good and altruism is evil. No. Not the way it works.
Margaret Thatcher, at the beginning of her government, sat down with her cabinet and took out a book by von Hayek, put it on the desk and said, "This is my Bible." And those are the ideas that we're all sociopaths. There is no such thing as altruism. I think there's been a danger in our culture.
She really did?
Yeah.
She
von Hayek,
believed that?
My Bible. Yeah, and that's the basis of Thatcherism. She had a survey done, I'm told, in the civil service to determine, you're basically saying whether you were there for your own profit and your own good, or whether you wanted to help people. And the people who wanted to help people were either weeded out or demoted.
That's insane. I never knew that. That's horrifying.
And it drove the politics from there, the destruction of the miners' unions, the Falklands War. They come out of this idea of assertion. And
yikes.
There is a notion, and it's a Victorian notion, of progress. This idea that we're getting better and we're getting better. And locked into that is a misinterpretation of evolution. And this was fundamental to the Nazis, that they took a simplistic view of Darwinism. Darwin had adopted the expression from Spencer about the survival of the fittest, which is the easiest thing to misunderstand in the world. It taken to be, by the Nazis, the survival of the brute, the survival of the most violent, the most assertive. And they actually, in reforming the public school service, created a situation where the bullies would be the ones in charge, because that was their ethos, that they are fittest to survive. Well, fitness to survive means, it can actually mean being weak rather than strong. It means being adapted to your environment. It means being able to survive in an environment. So, it's got nothing to do with strength. But there's still this theme, and it runs, say, if you look to Yuval Harari's Sapiens, or to some of the work of Jared Diamond, that there's this idea that there's almost an inevitability in the triumph of white European civilization through guns, germs, and steel, or what have you. And that relies upon the idea that it's almost like these people who believe that the singularity will come about, that AI, all the computers will get together and they'll become God and make everything wonderful. It's wishing and praying and hoping and dreaming that something will happen. So there's this idea in progress and evolution that says it had to be this way. Capitalism is the only form of the only system economically that will work, so on and so forth. And that's where David Graeber and David Wengrow, with The Dawn of Everything, really pulled apart any historical or prehistorical basis for these silly ideas, and said, actually, there have been many experiments in humanity. There have been societies that appear to have not had an authoritarian structure and not fought war. You have the Indus Valley, the Harappan society that lasted for 700 years without fighting a war. It's what is now contemporary Pakistan, where they haven't stopped fighting a war for the last 70 or 80 years. But to show that there are other ways of doing this, and that to be, mired in some, evolutionary world where there are selfish genes that are replicating themselves without understanding, we now have epigenetics. We now understand that, as Yuval says, genes are not read only. You can write on them in every generation. You can't help but change them. And for me, that makes our situation on this planet very hopeful indeed. We can evolve. We just aren't quickly enough.
And through cooperation of good people who can see that our survival depends on us getting together to take steps to preserve our habitat and our food sources and our planet and human rights for all.
Yeah. And until people step up to the plate and say, I'm responsible for my decisions, then we're going to be stuck. So if somebody doesn't understand something and thinks, oh, well, this person knows better than I do, I'll let them decide for me, we get into trouble. That is the nature of cults, that you fall in behind the parental figure.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if that parental figure is a rapscallion like Donald Trump, or an evil tyrant like Stalin, or even somebody who we see generally as being good like John F. Kennedy or Winston Churchill, that you shouldn't be falling in behind them. You should be questioning them, and you should be helping to arrive at decisions. For me, there's a very simple number. It keeps coming up again and again. Schopenhauer said 60% of people haven't become human. Erich Fromm in Escape from Freedom in 1941 said 60% of people have a pseudo self. They don't grow up. They don't become fully human. He blamed Nazism on that. Milgram comes along and his experiment in 63, 62.5%. And more recently, we've had Jane McGregor with her idea of 60% of people are apaths, as she calls them. It fascinates me that these four places, and I've not seen any connection between them. I've not seen any one of them refer to any other, or not noticed that. They come up with this idea, And if that is so, if the problem is, and I think it is, as Erich Fromm says, the pseudo-self, people are going, well, what should I be doing? What's the person next to me wearing? What kind of car should I be driving so the neighbors will be impressed? While you're all out there hoping to impress people, the fundamental characteristic of the narcissist, of course, you're not developing yourself. You're not becoming you. And if that can happen in our society, if they're right, that we've got about 40%, we only need another 11%, 12%. And we could then have a democracy. We could then have something that functioned as a democracy. And I think that's a very good idea, and we ought to do it now.
Doable.
It's doable.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Really, people, there's hope. And
there is.
But not by just avoiding or compartmentalizing or escaping into video gaming or pretending that someone else should do it and that you're too busy. This is our work. This is our planetary survival course of action.
Yeah, and it's also so much more enjoyable than doing as you're told.
Ultimately, that's true. Being in your body and having an internal locus of control, not looking outside to some authority figure to tell you what reality is, trusting your intuition and your gut, using your critical thinking, and having really good networks of people who are trustworthy that you can, I can call up my friend Jon and say, hey, Jon, look at this website. Like, give me your take on it, please, or vice versa. Or I read this great book, The Knowledge Illusion. Check it out. Tell me, let's talk about it and let's improve the ideas if they need improving, or let's plug it in.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, that there is a war on expertise. One of our current government ministers 10 years ago said, Michael Gove said, we've all had enough of experts. And he was talking about the education system at the time. And he brought in a rule that continuous assessment will no longer be used. The kids will only ever be tested by examination. Now, he's going against all of the expert studies in this. If you, and there are many of them. If you look to the work of Ken Robinson, Sir Ken Robinson, he explains why giving kids exams is it's just going to make them anxious.
It's terrible.
The most literate society in the world, every 2 years when the PISA tests are done, it's always Finland. Scandinavian countries. For maths, it will be one of the Asian countries. For literacy, they don't start teaching reading and writing till you're 7, and they only have one examination in there. All the time you're at school, you'll take one exam.
Yeah, and Sir Ken also talked about how the education system is built on the factory model of batching people by their ages and putting them through. And we now know, different people have different learning styles and strengths, and that the best way to learn is project oriented. Like put people together, have a project, let them collaborate and research and teach each other. They'll have investment emotionally into figuring out how to do the project, and they'll remember it after.
Yeah. And he gives examples from tens, even hundreds of schools where this has happened. What's the car racing, NASCAR or?
Yeah, in the US, yeah.
There was one school where the kids, when they were polled, said they wanted to build a car to ride, to go in the NASCAR, and they did it. And they talked about their attendance going up like crazy, that they'd be arriving at school early. And they did all of their subjects. They did academically better, much better than the average. But there was a motivation at the center of what they're doing, rather than boring the hell out of them, which is what school did to me.
Yeah, it did to me too. I survived by reading books, not school books. I was like past those.
Yeah, same for me. I used to stay home and I read all sorts of weird things because I had a brother who was 7 years older than me and shouldn't have been giving me Kafka and Sartre to read. I'll get over it one day,
And you read it?
Yeah, I not a lot, but I read The Trial by Kafka and Nausea by Sartre and found it nauseating, I must say. But
have you ever counted how many books you've read in your lifetime?
I have some idea. I read about 25 books a year. I'm not, I've met people who read 3 or 4 books a day. But because I'm a little plodding, I tend to remember. So, 250, 1,500 books maybe. And, and there are too many of them. People should stop writing.
Yeah,
books.
but you remember it and you annotate it back, the highlights, which is a system you developed for yourself that, frankly, I wish I started using 40 years ago or 50 years ago. But
it came along quite naturally because I was really, after I'd left Scientology, and I did it a little bit before that, but after I left Scientology, it became necessary to highlight things because I realized I'd otherwise have to read the book again. And I have a system of notation now that I can, there's an example of it. The paper I wrote in 93, I think it was, called Possible Origins for Dianetics and Scientology. I think one of my sexiest titles there. And it was written for a court case involving Frank Sarge Gabodi. And he'd sued Scientology. It was then he had the Institute for Research into Metapsychology. And on a side trip, it was actually me that gave him the name Metapsychology, quite by accident, but that's another matter altogether. And he'd sued them because he was getting, people were getting degree credits for studying with him, and they're fundamentally studying Dianetics and Scientology, but with some of the more lunatic bits, cut out. And Gabodi's a qualified psychiatrist, by the way. He's, and a fascinating man who I, got on with very well as a friend. But they basically Scientology went to the American Psychological Association, said, you can't give degree credits to this guy. He's plagiarized Hubbard. And so he contacted me after he'd launched the suit. I said, Sarge, we're good friends. Why didn't you tell me you were intending to do this? And you haven't got a problem because you say in your book that the ideas come from Hubbard. There was a bit of a pause. He said, that was the first edition.
Oh.
So
Oops.
the only place I could go with that, because they were using Dianetics and Scientology, they, call it plagiarism or whatever, they were using it. So I had to show that Hubbard had taken the ideas from other places. And it meant all I had to do was remember which books I'd read that had something that I recognized as coming from Scientology, because there on the back cover would be the notes. It took me, I think it took me 7 hours to write the paper. And if I'd not had the notes, if I'd not had that available, it would have been 70 hours instead of 7. So.
Yeah, I bet.
And as for once I was actually being paid, it was quite good,
Yeah. Jon,
yes,
always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
We were planning 10 minutes, but time flies when we get started, and I always enjoy talking with you. We converse weekly.
We do.
It's one of the highlights of my week to catch up with you and share.
Likewise. Yeah.
And I'm going to need to sign off, but please give my best to Pamela and your family, and we'll talk next week.
We will do. And let's finish our recording and then we'll say our goodbyes. So thanks to everybody for watching.
Thanks.
Hi, Jon here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.